We are today studying perhaps the greatest, the most important, the most central and significant of all the Parshat. Is it possible? Could today be the day? There's a case to be made. We study the Parsha every single week, but maybe this week's Parsha is the most important Parsha of them all, because this Parshat Yitro, Jethro in English, is the Parsha which contains the revelation at Mount Sinai. And the revelation at Mount Sinai is both theologically, according to Jewish theology, and just as a matter of narrative, it is the place in the Torah that speaks of the Torah's being given. Like the very idea that this Torah is a sacred book, that it is the word of God, that Moses got something from God that he then passed on to the rest of us, that we should busy ourselves with for the rest of time. That comes from this week's Parsha. Now, that there's a lot to be said about the revelation and what kind of revelation it was and what exactly, I mentioned theology, and we could get very quickly into some of the biggest and most contentious theological debates, both of ancient times and of present times. We often in this class will come across, sort of varying interpretations that speak to an underlying debate or disagreement over whether this book ought to be seen as the divine revelation, the word of God, or whether we ought to look at this text as a collage or an assemblage of different sources, right? But the notion that if you want to make the claim that this book is divine, you're going to start in this week's Parsha. This is the Parsha of Revelation. Now, so much to say, of course, here, and that's not to mention that the Parsha actually is named not after the revelation, but after Moses' father-in-law, who in the first chapter of the Parsha gives this, is a really fascinating scene where he gives Moshe all this advice about how to adjudicate law, and that's a worthy discussion in itself. But today, I wanted to focus, to get right into the heart of it and to focus on the revelation. That is what it was that came out of that moment. And what it was that came out of that moment, if I say this is the most important or the most significant, the most kind of central of all the Parshot, the revelation itself contains maybe, I think it's fair to say, the most famous section of the Torah. Not most famous meaning just about everyone in the world knows this section, and that section is Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments. The famous 10 Commandments. It is, I must say, it's something of it must have come to our ancestors as something of a shock that when God Almighty finally reveals at Mount Sinai, when God Almighty finally makes God's self known to the people, that the thing that God has to reveal is law. It comes as you might expect God to be saying, this is my nature, and this is how I care for humanity, and these are my favorite principles. Let me articulate principles for you. But instead, what we get are laws, very specific laws. It's as if the legal system begins, and what a strange thing that divine encounter immediately drags you into a legal system. And the legal system that will become one of the great hallmarks of Jewish life and tradition and religion eventually is composed of 613 commandments, which eventually gets translated into a whole legal system that's sort of worked out by the rabbis of the Talmud. But it all starts with 10 commandments, 10 laws, and they present themselves as if these are the most important of the laws. These are the first laws, and you just have a sense because they're delivered by God itself, and because they are contained in this compact format, you have this sense, and people have always had this sense, that there's something distinct about the Ten Commandments, that they represent maybe the most important laws, maybe the laws that structure the rest of the laws, maybe, as Judaism is often spoken of as kind of founding Western ethics. Is this the foundation of Western ethics? There's a lot to be said about, to be analyzed, to be worked out in great detail around the Ten Commandments and their significance. But today, I want to focus especially on just the fact of there being 10. There being 10, and not just the number 10, but the way that the Ten Commandments are presented in this very discrete, compact unit, and what it is that we're supposed to understand from that kind of codex. That kind of, it does appear as a little bit like a code that needs deciphering, and that's the work that we're going to try and do today. That is to say, 10 is already a very significant number, right? We've had already in this story, we had a big 10, right? The 10 plagues, right? And then, Jewish tradition looks for other 10s. Was the world created in 10 utterances? That's like a later idea, like parsing out so that you could have 10, 10, and 10. And then in the Kabbalistic tradition, there are 10 divine emanations, 10 divine qualities that God uses to create the world. So there's another 10, and maybe that was hidden in all along. Once you have the number 10, then it's easy to start. It's almost like playing a game. It's like you're looking for patterns. And I want us to have that kind of game playing mentality turned on today, because that's I'm not overly concerned with the number 10 itself, but I am interested in the project of looking at the Ten Commandments and trying to discern or decipher some structure, some way that this little, 2 tablets kind of, the classic image with the 10 lines, that maybe in this moment of revelation, there was something beyond just 10 laws, but actually a code for us to, a code in which something essential is condensed, some deep message is condensed into just 10 quick statements. Okay, so that's our work for today. Can we look at the 10 Commandments and, as our sages have done for thousands of years now, try to discern some kind of structure to the 10? Okay, what's going on here in this? Why was this the thing that God gave us? And is there more lurking behind just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Here are the top 10. Okay, so let's say a little blessing, and then we'll get into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so let's just take a look at the 10 Commandments themselves first, and we'll just try to see if we can do some of this work of identifying a structure, and then we'll turn to some of the great commentators who have one in particular who has done a rather elegant a job of that deciphering. So here is a source sheet for you. Okay, that should be good. All right, let's just take a look at 10 Commandments. Let's just read them. And there's some of them, I said they're 10 very quick statements. Some of them are quicker than others. There are some wordy ones, and we're not going to spend a ton of time parsing every single word, But it is worth just up front reading them straight through. So these are the very famous 10 commandments. Let's go for it. Okay, here we go. Do you see the chat here? No, you can't see that. Only I see the chat. So that when I'm like fiddling my cursor around, it's because I'm trying to move the chat out of the way. And I am having trouble doing so. There it is. Okay. All right. The 10 commandments. God comes down upon the mountain. The people are all gathered around Mount Sinai for 3 days in preparation. And as I said, there's no underestimating, underselling, appreciating the significance, the grandeur of this moment of revelation. But then God comes down on the mountain and says all these words to the people. And this is the only really direct revelation that the people ever have. This is like the only thing that the people, according to the narrative of the Torah, heard directly from God and not through Moses. So here we go. And I'll just say right up front that the numbering here is our classic numbering. There is different numbering that is sometimes done in the 10 Commandments. And just, I'm not going to speak all that out, but for example, in the Catholic tradition, Commandments 1 and 2 are read as the same commandment. Is that wrong, Matt? I see you shaking your head. Do I have it wrong? No. All right. I'm going to proceed.
Matt, you're muted, Matt.
No. Okay. Forget it. We're just going to move on. Okay. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I, the Eternal, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. Now, the reason that I think Catholics number it differently is a good one. This doesn't seem like a commandment. Okay, so first commandment.
Number it differently.
Oh, okay, that's what I was wondering if you were saying. Okay, good. Yeah. So maybe the Catholics do it like we do, and the Protestants number it differently. I'm not sure. Okay, great. So fair enough. I, the Eternal, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. That doesn't seem like a commandment. It seems like a statement, but our tradition reads that to be the commandment to believe that there is a God. Okay, so that's the way that we read. I am the Lord your God is a commandment. Now, the second commandment, which again could be, I am the Lord your God, don't have other gods. That could all be seen as one thought, but we number this differently. So the first commandment is believe in God, or affirm God, or know God. Know is probably the language used most frequently in the rabbinic discussion. Know that there is a God. Do not have any other gods besides me, and in particular, don't worship. This is the prohibition against idolatry. You shall not make for yourself. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Eternal, your God, am an impassioned God, sometimes translated as jealous God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. This is an example of the wordiness of some of the commandments. We're not going to, there's a lot to think about here, but we're not going to spend much time on it today. Why that is necessary to hear right now is a good question. But the commandment, the second commandment, is no idolatry, no foreign gods. Okay. Number 3, you shall not, and this one's a difficult one to translate, you shall not speak the name of the Eternal your God in vain. We usually say, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. right? Or you shall not swear falsely by God's name. The idea literally in Hebrew, do not pick up the name of the Lord your God or the eternal your God for nothing. Okay, so don't use God's name and swear by God's name for no purpose, or maybe falsely. There's different ways to translate it. For the eternal one, not clear one who swears falsely by God's name. Okay? Know that there's a God. Don't worship other gods. Don't use God's name in false or lighthearted ways. Okay, here comes some familiar ones. Zachar et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Shabbat. The fourth commandment is Shabbat. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the eternal, your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servant or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the eternal made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day, and therefore the eternal blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Okay, another wordy one. And by the way, here's just an aside. The wording here is famously a little bit different than the wording of the Ten Commandments when Moses repeats them in Deuteronomy. And that's another kind of analysis that our tradition has spilled a lot of ink in doing. What is the difference between the Ten Commandments as they appear in Exodus and the Ten Commandments as they appear in Deuteronomy? Little differences, some major differences, but mostly the same. We're not going to do that work today, but I mention it because it's another illustration of the centrality of the Ten Commandments. The fact that these Ten Commandments are repeated again in Deuteronomy. It's like, oh, they've become a code. They've become a code. Okay, so where are we? The Sabbath day. That's number 4. Number 5, honor your mother and honor your father and your mother, that you may endure long on the land the eternal your God is assigning to you. Okay, that was Desmond Decker, the song that we opened with. Honor your father and your mother. Okay, now some quick ones. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You often translated as thou shalt not lie. Do not oppress your neighbor with a false testimony is the literal wording there. Okay. And then finally, and this is an important one, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. This is the one I always forget, but it's very important. You shall not desire that which is not yours. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or male or female slave or ox or ass or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay. That's different, by the way, than stealing. Stealing is the actual taking. This is just the desiring of that which is not yours. Okay, so those are the 10 commandments. And let's just start by asking if you see any kind of patterns or themes running through the commandments, but I hesitate to use the word themes, like we could just look for any theme that emerges, because what I'm really looking for here is a structure. Is there any structure to the 10 commandments? Is there some sort of like sequencing or ordering, or does it make sense to you as 10 things? Do you see anything happening here? And I want to just put up one, because we just read through and there's a lot of words there. Here's a visual. We usually see them like on those 2 tablets, and we usually just see don't steal, don't lie. Like you can just keep the principles in mind. So let's just do that for a second so that we could just have them all in our field of vision. Here's the 10 commandments, just like there they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So just one more time, let's look. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. And then on the other side, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet anything that is your neighbor. So this is a little bit of a quick and sort of clearly laid out 10. Okay. So what are we seeing here so far? I see a lot of hands up. Let's start with Rebecca.
My Hebrew school education, this is how I always remembered it, was your first 5 were the do's and the second 5 were the do nots. So the first half we're told, I guess don't take in vain is also, but it's sort of like the establishment of like God and like God traits. And then the second half is just like your basic, don't do these things.
Great. Okay, great. Now that's a perfect one. There's the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots. And you can really feel that because they just express, remember the Sabbath day, honor your mother and father, thou shalt not kill. It's just a very different formulation. And as Rebecca says, it almost, well, I don't know. It largely works out to see the first 5 as the do's and the second 5 as the do nots, but it doesn't quite work. And that's what Rebecca's kicking up for us here is one of the immediate first moves that our interpreters throughout the ages have often made, and that is the move to see the 10 commandments as 5 and 5. And that's an easy thing to do with 10. Look, I have 10 fingers, 5 and 5. But it also makes sense because Moses brought down 2 tablets. So I guess there were 5 on each, right? So that's a good move. Can we split them into 2? And we'll keep that in mind as a possibility. But it doesn't quite work out to say the do's and the do nots, does it? Because there's a couple of do nots here. You shall have no other. There's this word no. No, you shall not have, or no, you shall not swear falsely. This word in the Hebrew, lo. That's the word that begins all of the second 5. But it does begin 2 of the first 5. So it doesn't quite work out. Rebecca's definitely identifying an important division, but it's not totally clean. Let's keep going. Marlene.
So I think the first 4 seem to be the commitment to a monotheistic religion. And so it's almost like the first 4 say, okay, if you're going to commit yourself to me, these 4 are what you have to do to commit yourself, including the Shabbat. And then the others are, and this is the way you should behave as the Jewish people once you've accepted me as your God.
Beautiful, beautiful, Marlene, beautiful. That is keenly identified. The first 4 seem to have to do with God and our relationship to God. And the last 6 have to do with our relationship to one another. The classic language for this in Jewish law is bein adam lemakom, between a human being and the eternal, the ever present, and then bein adam lechavero, between a human being and his friend and another human being. Okay, so that's a very important split just in thinking about what is these laws of the Torah. What are they up to? What are their concerns? And one is the realm of divine service, and the other one is the realm of interpersonal relationship, human interaction, the social world. And here the commandments start with God and then move to people. Now, what Marlene has identified there is exactly what the commentator that we're going to spend our time with today is the Kli Yakar. And you may know that the Kli Yakar is sort of my favorite of the commentators. The Kli Yakar is a 17th century rabbi in Prague, Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim Lunshitz, and he's perfect for this job because he's always looking for patterns and codes and hidden messaging in the structure and language of the Torah. And he's going to do that in fine fashion today. And he begins exactly where Marlene begins, in saying, the first set of in the commandments is God focused, and the second set is human focused. However, the Kli Yakar doesn't like what Marlene did very naturally, which is to say there's for the first 4 and the last 6. A Kli Yakar doesn't like that. Why? Because that's inelegant. I see Larry doing it. It's got to be 5 and 5. It's got to be 5 and 5, right? And that's what the Kliyakar says. It is 5 and 5. And so, well, here's what I want to do. I'm going to amplify what Marlene has given us by taking it to the Kliyakar's version. And I want you to start to see the way he is working with exactly that kind of dichotomy, but wants it to be more perfect than that, wants it to be 5 and 5. So let's just take a look at what the Kliyakar says. Kliyakar is the person that we're going to spend all our time with today, and he makes a couple of bold moves here. And the first one is the one that Marlene has already helped us to make. Okay. Somebody, I think I just saw as I was going to somebody in the chat said, what does that mean, Kliyakar? It means the precious vessel, the precious vessel. Okay, let's take a look. The Kliyakar here. So now let's go down. The Kliyakar picks up at the commandment, which is going to be a problem for him, which is honor your mother, your father, and your mother, right? Because that's the 5th commandment. That's this one here. And as Marlene said, these seem to have to do with God. I'm the Lord your God, don't have other gods, don't swear by God. And remember Shabbat because God created the world. This seems clearly to have to do with other people, as do all of these. And so the new idea starts here, but the Kliyakar doesn't like that. Honor your mother and your father. With this mitzvah, we conclude the first 5 commandments, which speak about honoring the blessed and ever-present God. Okay, and that is why, and here's a cool thing that he points out, that is why these all mention the eternal your God, whereas God's name is not mentioned in any of the last 5 commandments, which speak about relationships between human beings. Okay, exactly what Marlene just said, except that you can see he's already claiming that it's not 4 and 6, but 5 and 5. And he points out another interesting thing. God is mentioned here. God is referred to here. Actually, in the fullness of the commandment, you actually have God spoken out, right? I am God. That's in, like, I am God seems to be in all of these first commandments. You shall not swear falsely by God. Remember the Sabbath day because God created the Sabbath day. And then, I'm sorry, I'm not going to keep jumping back and forth here because it's maybe easier just to stay with one sheet. But there's honor your father and your mother that you may endure on the land that the eternal your God is assigning you. Oh, so that part works out. Okay. God is actually mentioned in all the first five commandments. So that's cool. But Kliyakar's got a big problem. It's not so neat and tidy as at 5 and 5, because that last commandment, as Marlene saw immediately, has to do with interpersonal relationships, the relationship between me and my mother and father. So let's take a look at how the Kliyakar resolves it. Okay. So he says, and as for the mitzvah of honoring one's father and mother, yeah, I know that's a problem, even though that is about relationships between human beings. Nevertheless, it also connects to honoring the blessed and ever-present God, because there are 3 partners in making a person: the Holy One, the father, and the mother. So honoring your parents, well, that evokes God, because God also was a part of the process, because if one honors one's father and mother who form the physical body, which eventually decays, well, then all the more so one honors one's father in heaven, who gives the soul, the part of us that lasts forever. Okay? And then he says, and that's why the eternal your God is mentioned in the commandment to honor your father and mother. God places God's name. God places God's name in the father and alongside the father and mother. I just translated this morning, so forgive the errors. In order to tell you that when you honor your father and mother, it's as if you've honored me. Okay. All right. So did that work out? Did he iron that out for us? I mean, so now we have a couple of things to deal with here. We have like the split that we've had a couple of splits that have been suggested. Rebecca suggested the do's and the don'ts. Marlene suggested the God-centered and the human-centered commandments. And the Kli Yakar is with Marlene, but wants it to be 5 and 5. Wants it to be even almost like Rebecca wanted it to be 5 and 5, but it just doesn't quite work out. We can't quite and get it into that structure. And so you feel the Kli Yakar kind of jamming it in. Or does anyone buy it? Has he made a good argument here? Because after all, he's right about one thing, that God is mentioned in all of those commandments. And there is a shift in tone when we move to lo tirtzach, lo sinaf, lo tignov. Like there's don't do this, it does feel like there is a little bit of a shift in the way the commandments are kind of spat out. Okay. All right, so now we've got one template to process or deal with, which is God and humanity. Okay, there's a split there. What do you think of that split, and what do you think of what the Kli Yakar is trying to do with it? Emily, Alan.
Well, I was seeing kind of 3 types of commandments and wonder, I don't know if this could fit into what you're asking, but the first 3 are definitely about committing to belief in God. Right. Mm-hmm. The second 2, you could say, are about the individual, because you could observe Shabbat even if you didn't believe in God, like many reasons to honor creation, and then honor your father and mother. So those 2 kind of place the individual into some sort of holy state, holy consideration kind of. And then the last 5 is about society. So I kind of see God, the self, and society in there.
Good. I love that. That's great. That's great what Emily's just offered us. Maybe it's not 5 and 5, but 3, 2, and 5. And there's something about these 2 that are distinct. These are all very God-centric. Yeah, it's true. God created the world, and we remember God on the Sabbath day. And boy, I guess you could say that God is involved in the process of honoring your father and mother. That seemed like it was a bit of a stretch, but the way Emily reads it, she doesn't get the 5 and 5. And I just like, when I say the 5 and 5, I just want to like make clear what I'm talking about is there's a yearning for symmetry here. That our interpreters want this to be not just content elegant, but also structurally elegant. Okay. But Emily says if we can get the content elegance, if we leave aside a little bit of the structure elegance, 3, 2, and 5. And I love what Emily's done here is to suggest that 4 and 5 are distinct from the others. So these are all the things you don't do to people. These are the things you owe to God. And these are sort of, I don't know, Emily called it individual, your personal, your life practice, your family practice, maybe. Okay, great. That's great. That's a great move. Let's see here. Let's take a couple more, and then we'll dive back into the Kli Yakar. Alexandra.
Hi. I think if the Kli Yakar would like to strengthen his argument, perhaps he could add that maybe it's referring to honor your forefathers and foremothers from Avotenu ve'imotenu of the religion. And in terms of the structure of the 10 Commandments, I'm looking at it and enjoying thinking about it as not as a divided list, but a list that builds on itself up to bestowing on humans and making them understand that we have personal accountability based in our own inner godliness that God has given us. So that it's like, first we have to understand who God is not. We have to understand our own divinity. We have to take personal accountability by knowing that sometimes our actions are because God compelled us to do so, number 3, and sometimes our actions, like if you want to start wars, humans, don't do it in my name. That's your personal accountability. Don't blame me for your inquisitions, all your shtuyot. Like that's your humans, that's not God's actions. And then up to 10, like building, and like these are the ways that you behave as a godly person, as someone enacting your own divinity in the world. And then up to 10, I see don't covet as really God letting us know like our energy, our focus has the power to create, the power to destroy. So when we are coveting that which is someone else's, or not even someone else's necessarily, but doesn't belong to us, is actually degrading to the object of that. It can actually, like in the energetic mystical realms that eventually manifest in the physical, like really create action and really create harm. So I see it as like God saying, I'm God, and I'm teaching you all how to be your own like holy beings with your own.
Great. Okay, this is some brilliant interpretation from Alexandra here. First of all, and I think Alexandra is helping the Kliyakar a lot, actually, because first of all, Alexandra says, if we regard the commandment to honor one's father and mother as not just specific to those two people, but just to ancestry, to the fact of my having come into the world and having, been produced by a series of, imagine there's a big bang, and then there's like eventually life, and then there's eventually a human species, and eventually there's like my ancestor generation, and it leads to me. It's like, there really is a kind of a tracing back to honor one's father and mother is to say, I have, thank God I've come into the world. And there is a kind of a connection there. I like what you did there. And then Alexandra does something else very important, which we have to do at some point in this conversation, this reflection upon the Kliyakar's binary or Marlene's binary. Which is to say, if it's God and people, well, that's a neat way to, to label the first five and the second five, but why is that important? Why do we even have the phrases in Jewish law, bein adam l'makom, between a person and God, the obligations, bein adam l'chavero, between a person and other people, obligations? Why do we split? Because these are two primary realms of thought, but also because Alexandra suggests one is built upon the other. And the 10 commandments in doing, well, let's say 5 and 5, or 4 and 6, or 3, 2 and 5, in doing that kind of like stacking, the 10 commandments is telling us something really central about the whole Jewish vision of conduct, which is that you must begin with your awareness of the source, the sacred, the eternal, the all-powerful, and really like get that relationship into your system. And then from there, you can begin, like the obligations you have to other people are built on that, on some kind of sacred awareness that underlies all of society as well. And you begin to take your divine understandings into your human understandings. To say that God is all powerful, in the language of Exodus, is, for example, to say that no one human being is all powerful over other human beings, right? There's no Pharaoh. If God, no Pharaoh, right? So there's a kind of an inevitable implication of all of our kind of God-centric obligations for eventually our human-centric obligations. The most obvious being that God says these same things, but no, it's more than that. It's understanding what God is leads you to a deeper appreciation of the sanctity of the human beings that God has created. Okay, I want to now take a look at more in the Kliyakar's system, because the next thing that he does is, if you thought that it was cool that what Marlene said, or what the Kliyakar has just said, that there's God and then there's people, and if maybe you were even convinced by the Kliyakar suggestion that no, that fifth commandment actually is a God commandment, maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but here you can see him trying to build this pristine structure, and then he takes it a step further. And we're going to spend the rest of our time on this Kliyakar. It is really a masterpiece of Parshanut. It's actually him drawing from an earlier midrashic source, the Mechilta. So the masterpiece, is built earlier and is layered through time. But now I want to show you where the Kliyakar goes next, because it's just we're thinking about structure and just the ability to kind of play with or make sense of the structure here is a thing of art, but also now that we've laid a foundation for thinking about God and people as two major realms of our religious obligations, let's see how they might be connected. So take a look at what he says here. Really quite beautiful, if nothing else. Meaning, if nothing else, meaning if you don't buy it. Well, let's see if you buy it. Okay, so here, then we get to, we see, right, he started explaining this around the 5th commandment because he has trouble with honor your mother and father, and he came up with this alternate explanation. But by the time you get to the 6th commandment, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery. Now he begins a new kind of analysis. After God finishes with the commandments that are between humans and God, we move to the commandments that are between one human being and another. Bein Adam lechavero, very famous phrase there. Bein Adam lechavero. Bein Adam lemakom is the other phrase, just in case you want to take note of these. Between a person and the ever-present is this word for God means the place of the world, and then between Bein Adam lechavero, between a person and their friend, their fellow. Okay. And he says, it says in the Mechilta Midrash, I said he's building on an earlier tradition. It says in the Mechilta Midrash that the two sets are parallel to one another. Ze lu'umat ze. They are not just 5 and 5. They're not just 5 with one theme and 5 with the other, but they are parallel to one another, meaning, as you'll soon see, this one is, because, imagine these tablets here. This one is parallel to this one, and this one is parallel to this one. Okay, so let's see how he does that. We'll go one at a time here. So when it says, you shall not kill, that is parallel to, I am the Lord your God. Let's just look at that again. This is a wild thing he's saying. So this and this are somehow linked, and the answer is, for when someone spills the blood of another, it is as if they destroy the divine form and image. As it says in Genesis 15, one who spills a person's blood, their blood shall be spilled, for the human was made in the image of God. But Tselem Elokim, right? The famous phrase, in the image of God. And this principle means that even if someone says, okay, so that's the basic point. The basic point is, I am the Lord your God is basically the same principle as you shall not kill, because when you kill the divine form, because every human being possesses the divine form. Now that's a huge thing to say, that, and it builds directly on what Alexander was saying. But it's this precise formulation that God is imprinted in all of us. So when we kill each other, we kill a piece of God. And so these two commandments are linked. In order to understand why you shouldn't kill someone, you have to understand that God exists and that God is in people. Okay, and let's just to hear out an implication. We're going to do this now with all of the 5 sets. Hopefully, we'll finish before 1. But let's take a look at one implication of this. He says is, and this principle means that even if someone says, "Please kill me," I will forgive you for it. Even so, the killer would be punished. It is not possible for a person to forgive their own murder, for every person has a piece of God above in them. Okay, so that's a legal implication that he understands. Maybe you would think you can't murder someone, but if someone asks you to, that's fine. No, because it isn't just hurting a person. It's destroying the divine image. Okay, so let me take a step back here again and ask, like, what are we seeing here? And do you buy this? That there might be a kind of a parallel between the 1st commandment and the 6th commandment. I think I want to do just one more, because we could play around with those 2 ideas. Let's just do one more just to see him in action and see what he's going to try and do and I actually think the next one is probably the one that works the best. Okay, because he says here that it's also true then that you shall have no other gods before me. is parallel to you shall not commit adultery. And I think you smart people out there will, and I mean all of you, will see the link immediately. And the prophets of Israel also used a metaphor that makes it clear. Idol worshipers are referred to often as an adulterous wife in Ezekiel 16:32. And it's wife, by the way, because that's us. We, the people of Israel, are the adulterous wife. The people of Israel are referred to as a woman in the metaphor. Then God being the husband, we've cheated on God by worshiping other gods. Okay, gender dynamics there, surely, that we could like problematize, no question. But you see the basic parallel, right? To cheat on God is like to cheat on people, right? And there's a kind of parallel. Now it's like to destroy a person is destroying God, and to cheat on a person is the same energy, the same ethic, the same principle as to cheat on God. And there's like, it's now almost like we're identifying five tiers or five basic principles. There are 10 commandments, but there's 5 underlying principles that you could stack one on top of the other. Okay, we'll make sure to see them all before we finish, but let's just take a pause here. I see hands up, but I'm not sure this is your moment. Wave to me if you're ready to go. All of you are ready to go. Okay, so let's hear from Matt, Noah, and Ariella.
Against his previous trying to make 5 into a God thing, because he's now making all of them into God things. And so you can't have 5 and 5 if it's really 10. And I personally, if I were drawing this, I would say 5 parallels to 1. Because honoring your father and mother is sort of like saying, I am God, which is an honoring thing. And then his third, I just have to say that is just so weak. You didn't mention it, but that stealing is like, it's like, I mean, it's just, no, it's stealing is not falsely talking about God. He's just.
Oh, no, Matt's not convinced. All right, Matt mentions
but
it.
I do think it absolutely is a God world, people world, the people world parallels the God world. I think that is absolutely there. I just don't think that we can make this tiny little detail that we need to, because if killing people is God thing, then there's 6 and 4, and then there's not, and I just want to just make one really quick point. Can I make? Okay,
very quick, because we're really running out of time here.
I 1 through 4 or 5 or whatever, I still can't be a Jew. It's all the stuff about God and tells me nothing about doing the religion. That's why we've got that other book coming up that tells us what to do. I can have a society with 5 through 10. I can't have the religion with 1 through 4.
Okay. So wait. First of all, Matt mentions number 3 or the third set, and Matt doesn't like the third set. So let's just see it. I want us to see all of these because they're just, it's just so cool. Like we can decide we don't buy it, but there's something so cool about this kind of, just at least to my sensibilities. This is the beauty of Parshanut, of interpretation. It's like pattern spotting, sometimes pattern seeking, and maybe you don't buy the pattern that he's identified, but we should at least see it because it's almost acrobatic. Okay, here's the next one. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the eternal your God. Oh, sorry. Yeah, by the name of the eternal your God is parallel to you shall not steal, because one who steals will end up swearing falsely. And also one who steals. So that's the first point. First point is, if you steal something, eventually you're going to say, I swear to God, I didn't do it. So they're connected in that way. But I think this is the deeper connection. Also, one who steals acts as if the eye above cannot see, just as one who swears falsely to justify their lies acts as if the eye above cannot see. So Matt doesn't buy it, but you can start to feel what the Kliyakar is doing. Like, I tried to write it down, and I don't know if I came up with the right words, but the first principle is like something against destruction, annihilation. And don't destroy a person because you would be destroying God. The second principle is something like betrayal, right? Don't betray a person, don't betray God. So the third principle here is something like disregard. Who cares if this property belongs to someone else? Who cares what God's name means? Just like, who cares? I want what's mine, right? So like, you can see that there's a kind of a suggestion of like kind of underlying principles here, okay? And Matt says, I'm not sure I buy 3, but Matt does say, and this might be the takeaway that many of you leave this conversation with, I like what he's doing in general. What Marlene started us off doing, it's just what Alexandra named, this suggestion that there really is an important relationship between the divine consideration and the human consideration, and they are often threaded through. Theology and ethics are interwoven in this tradition. Now, Matt says, but I'm not sure I buy all the connections. Okay, maybe you don't buy all the connections, but I think part of what's important is seeing the search for these connections itself leads to a kind of unearthing of something that we are swayed by, which is the basic dichotomy that and maybe the relationship between those two basic spheres, maybe if not all of them precisely. Okay, Noah Pollock.
Yeah, I've seen them this time. Both the cars blend, Heschel, Buber, and Soloveitchik. That I'm seeing the first 4 of them. They're the start of the relationship in building a society that's completely founded on the I-thou relationship, that we're bringing the actions of God into the world, creating holy worlds through our speech and through our actions. Number 5, I'm seeing as this very, very start of Buber's I-you relationship, that for Shalom Bayit and Shalom in society, we have to honor and respect our parents as we honor and respect others. And the next 5
okay,
are...
I'm gonna cut you off here because I can see you've thought through all of them, but just because we're running out of time, you said something so really important that and directly applicable that I want to underscore what you've said, which is Martin Buber famously speaks about our relationship with God as a dialogic relationship, like one that we are in dialogue with God, and therefore the being in a relationship with God is about identifying another and speaking to another and being in relationship with another, and that becomes the central metaphor in his theology, and maybe it is the central metaphor in Jewish theology, that we use the fact of our being able to relate to and see another human being. We use that as a kind of a template for thinking about relating to God. We don't actually believe that God is another listening person who has feelings and thoughts like a human being does, but we use that device in order to think about relationships, our relationship now with God and our relationship with people. And in that sense, it's almost like instead of our God consciousness teaching us how to act with people, it's our people consciousness that teaches us how to reach out and relate to God, right? So that's a very important framework that Buber and Noah offer us to think about how all of this is about relationships. And there's the vertical relationship and the horizontal relationships, but they're similar kind of movements or dynamics. Okay, Ariella?
Well, when you talked about the first one about not killing, it immediately, what came to my mind was every person has a neshama, a soul given by God, so that when we're killing another person, it's like we're killing what God has given. So that really made sense to me, the fact that there really is a connection.
Good. Okay, good. So back to number one there. We see human beings as embodying divinity. Good. Let's just, as we now are counting down the last few minutes here, let's just look at the last two, and then I think we'll have time for one last comment from Jen. Let's look at the last two. The fourth set is, I think, very elegantly done. Some of these are really nice. And the fourth set is, remember the Sabbath day is parallel to you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Because one who desecrates the Shabbat is testifying that the Holy Blessed One did not create the world. So it's like lying. Now, I don't know if you buy this, but it's there's something kind of elegant about it, because remember, Shabbat was about remembering that in 6 days, the Eternal made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day. So when you keep Shabbat, the idea is that you're testifying to God's handiwork. And so if you don't keep Shabbat, you're falsely testifying, right? So there's like, you can lie about other people and you shouldn't do that. And you can lie about God and you shouldn't do that. You should be honest about how you represent others, okay? And then, so I like some of these connections a lot. I have to say, we started off with him like not being able to quite figure out the fifth commandment, honor your mother and father. And here he is at the end, again, trying to figure out that fifth commandment. And once again, I feel like this is the fly in the ointment for the Kliyakar. Once again, it's like very contorted explanation for how honor your mother and father. Remember, that had to be one of the divine commandments. And now it also has to be the one that stacks against you shall not covet. And remember, one of the things you shouldn't covet is your neighbor's wife. Now, it's not sleeping with your neighbor's wife. That's adultery. It's just desiring to sleep with her. So take a look at what he says. And for those of you who have not been convinced all along, this will be good fodder for your case, I think. But it's also interesting. He says, the last one here. You honor your father and mother is parallel to you shall not covet, because anyone who desires what is not theirs, such as their neighbor's wife, will end up thinking about her during sex, and then it will be as if the child that is born from that sex will have been born from another woman, the one he desired and fantasized about. And so the child will not honor their mother as they should, because their father was fantasizing about this other woman. And they will also not honor their father, because this father who desired the other woman was not really trying to have this child, but just to fulfill his lusts. His intention was not directed towards this union, and so it is as if the child is not his. And so the child will not honor him. Because everything follows from intention. Look at that last line there. Hakol holech achar hakavana. Now, I bet some of you feel, as I just said, like, oh, this is quite a stretch. And it's really like, and what is he even saying? And like, oh, this child won't respect because they'll know you were fantasizing about someone else during sex. Like very, like that's quite a move. And remember, this command was already troubling to him. But I do like the idea that he's saying intention matters. The underlying principle matters here. It's not just your behavior, but it is your consciousness. It's the value and the virtue and the principle that your mind is directed towards. And that notion does seem like a big part of what the Kliyakar has been saying all along. Is it isn't just that we don't do these 10 things, it's that there are some foundational underlying values that these 10 things are expressing, not destroying, not misrepresenting, not disregarding, not betraying, right? So there's like principles in there, and he's searching for them, and maybe it's not always clean and tidy, the work that he ends up doing, but there's some, the work is noble, I think, in itself. All right, we got time for one last quick comment from Jen.
I mean, we have this idea that we have to have these linear lists that we're sort of chopping into bits and then putting next to each other. And I think that we're really limited when we try to visualize this linearly, because if I were to draw the conversation that we just had, like, it would be a spiral. each one has a time to pass the other multiple times and connect with each other one. And every connection that you make brings up something new and something different. I mean, and that's, if I were to map this conversation, that would be exactly how it would look. So I think, you know, I don't know how you'd fit that on 2 tablets. But I think if we visualize it as a spiral, then we free ourselves up to be more spiritually creative with this. And maybe that's the point.
Good. Okay, great. That's a great note to end on, because part of what we've been doing throughout this class, we're thinking about the 10 Commandments. We're thinking about the values underlying the 10 Commandments. It's an important thing to do, but we're also following the kind of the artistry and the kind of the pattern that the Kli Yakar is trying to give us. And because there are 10 commandments, as I said at the start, there's this kind of, because there are even on 2 tablets, there's this temptation. And because above all, we regard this as a divine text, surely the structure of it, the number of it, the layout of it, that's important as well. And that's one tendency in the tradition, is to honor the perfection and the divinity of this text by finding its hidden patterns. But on the other hand, and Jen cautions us, and we should take this caution, let's be careful, because some of the areas in which we saw the Kli Yakar, we started to feel like he was overreaching, was the desire for a perfect pattern above the recognition of all the complications in the text and the nuances in the text. And surely a sacred and divine text has that as well, nuance and complexity. So we have to be very careful. There's something beautiful about the way that our interpretive tradition seeks to find categories and patterns in the text. But it's also true that this is language and these are values, and those things are full of subtleties and complexities and spirals and interconnectedness that sometimes sometimes it doesn't do the text justice just to say there's 10 and 10 and 5 and 5 and they all stack up. Like, sometimes you can over pattern. So let's be cautious of that as well. So, okay, great work today, everybody. Have a good Shabbos, and I'll see you next week. Bye.